All right, we are back for lesson 1.2. We're in unit 1, lesson 2. The history of marine science is going to be the topic that we're covering. Just a reminder for you distance folks, you do need to be completing the study guide, especially if you are in a standard section and want that 5% bonus for your test grade. And even for honor students, getting this study guide completed is going to definitely help make sure that you are able to do well on the test. The study guide is very, very focused on the heart of the test questions themselves. So trying to offer these lectures to help you get the study guide done, and help you get the study guide done so that you can do well on the test. 75% of your grade for this class and for every class in St. Johns County is from those tests, those summative assessments. So we want to make sure that you're doing as well as you can to get this study guide complete. All right, history of marine science. Number 1, describe early human use of the ocean. You can just kind of find 1 or 2 things to highlight here. For number 1, really there won't be any test questions from this slide here, but I'm going to walk you through it anyway. There's some evidence that suggests that humans have been using the sea since very, very early times. Clamshells, which are approximately 165,000 years old, have been discovered in a cave in South Africa. Shell harpoons and fish hooks that are estimated at over 100,000 years old. They've been found in places as well. We have tons of evidence showing a very, very long relationship between humans and the ocean. We have ancient Pacific Islanders and Phoenicians who had detailed knowledge about marine life and about how to navigate the sea, especially for that time period, far beyond what other people had. And then ancient Greeks and Romans had some pretty extensive knowledge of near-shore organisms. They weren't doing much like open ocean kind of sailing, but they had a pretty extensive knowledge of some of the organisms that could be found near shore. They were doing some science already. They were doing some marine biology, even in ancient Greece and Rome. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, described many forms of marine life, recognized the function of marine organism body parts, as the first person on record to explain what gills were for, that they were ultimately a part of the fish breathing apparatus. And then this is a part that is going to show up on the test. I want to make sure that you get down. During the Dark Ages, scientific inquiry came to a halt in Europe, with the exception of Vikings. For the rest of Europe, scientific inquiry, not just about the ocean, but scientific inquiry, period, came to a halt, which is ultimately why they're referred to as the Dark Ages. And some other places in the world, however, it did continue to go. So for the Vikings, the Arabs, Pacific Islanders, Asians continued their ocean studies during this Dark Ages and throughout the Middle Ages, even when Europe had ultimately ceased doing any of this research. Moving on to that was question number 2. It kind of falls under category 1, but that was the answer to number 2. And make sure that you get that in the right place. Number 3, name and describe 4 major names. I didn't highlight up here on the slides the things that you should be writing down. Ultimately, I'll kind of walk you through it as we go. So the first name that you're going to write down is Captain James Cook. His crew included naturalists. They sailed around the world beginning in 1768. They were the first Europeans to view the Antarctic ice fields, also probably the first Europeans to land on Hawaii, Tahiti, and many of the other Pacific islands. Let's go ahead and write this last part for him, that his crew did extensive mapping and they brought back many specimens. We can go ahead and have that for James Cook. Our second one is Darwin. A lot to say about Darwin. You do not have to write all of this down. On the next slide, we're going to have the part that I need you to write. So Darwin sailed on the HMS Beagle, 1831 to 1836. He was a naturalist on a crew, doing lots of other things too. And so, the primary goal of the expedition was mostly to map the coastlines, while Darwin was there, he did a lot of observing and collecting and ultimately writing about the organisms that he observed. All of these observations that he made on this trip on the HMS Beagle ultimately led him to begin to formulate his principle of natural selection, and then ultimately onto the theory of evolution. It's kind of an odd detail to focus on, but it does pop up on the test. Darwin's specialization, especially early on, kind of before he got into a lot of the other stuff, his specialization was barnacles, and experts today still use his work on barnacles as a reference. He did a very, very thorough and wonderful job in reference to barnacles. So that's what we want you to have for Darwin. Still answer number 3 here. This is our third name that we're going to write down, Lieutenant Charles Wilkes. Wilkes commanded the United States Exploratory Expedition 1838 to 42, laid the foundation for government spending. In fact, that's the part that I want you to write for him, that it laid the foundation for government spending, now becoming a public interest and not just something that people were privately doing. His team charted the coast of Antarctica, Pacific Northwest, and North America, and 280 islands in the South Pacific. It was a pretty tall task that they took on. They collected numerous biological specimens, of course, along the way too. So a major contribution that came from Lieutenant Charles Wilkes. And last one that we're going to write about here for this question for number 3, Edward Forbes. He extensively studied the sea floor around the British Isles and the Aegean Sea and some other locations in the 1840s and 1850s. And then here's the part that we want to write down. He discovered that species on the sea floor varied greatly depending on the depth. That in shallow areas you're going to have very, very different specimens than what you were going to find in deeper areas, which is really a major fundamental principle of marine biology, and he was one of the people to kind of first stumble across this idea through his research. Now we move on to number 4, describe the Challenger expedition. You don't have to write all of this down. There is going to be a section that you have to have on the next slide, but if you can capture a little bit, highlight a little bit of this, that'd be great. For the Challenger expedition, it was 1872 to 1876. First marine exploration that was devoted solely to the study of marine organisms. You know, Darwin and some of these other folks, they were doing other stuff too. The expedition was about mapping or about other purposes, but somebody happened to do a little bit of marine science while they were there. This Challenger expedition was solely focused on the study of marine organisms, really for the first time in recorded history. The Challenger itself was a British warship that was refitted for scientific study. That was done through the guidance of a scientist, through Charles W. Thompson. He helped them to really kind of figure out how to turn this warship into a scientific vessel. The Challenger ultimately went around the world over a period of 3.5 years. Next slide, I'll show you kind of an image of that trek that we took. Or they took, I said we, like I was on it, I wasn't on that boat. The trek that they took. The crew discovered thousands of species that were previously undescribed and published a 50-volume work of data that took 19 years to put together. This was more information about the ocean than had ever been documented in all of previous human history. So this Challenger expedition was a major contribution, especially kind of early on in a field that has exploded since then. We now know so much more even than what they were able to put together in that 50-volume work, but truly an admirable feat that they took on in putting that much information all together for the sake of marine science. And here's a little image of the expedition here, starting here in England, and then you can see truly, literally around the world. They went all over the place, north, south, east, west, and were able to gather a remarkable amount of information. Now we move on to modern marine science. This is where we're going to answer is number 5 and 6, and I'll try to make this fairly quick. So many marine biologist research stations exist in locations around the world. This is a fairly modern phenomenon. As you can see, the first one was established in 1872. And that was in Naples, Italy. We do want you to know that the very first one was in Italy. Several facilities also exist in the United States, including the first one there, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute and Marine Biological Laboratory in Massachusetts. That was the first one in the United States, and we've got a couple of others listed there as well. And then we get to number 6. We're going to name 6 tools that are used in marine science, but there's going to be 2 of them that have sections highlighted that are going to be important to the test that you want to make sure you're right. So you can just name all 6, but for those 2 that are highlighted, write that extra highlighted bit of information as well. So the first one is highlighted, remote sensing. This is going to be satellites that are used to study large expanses of the ocean's surface. Obviously, it's satellite, up in space. The surface is all that it can see. It cannot be under the water examining things in the water, but it can do some really marvelous things, especially giving us some big picture images of what's happening at the surface of the ocean. Give us that big picture because it is so far away. Sonar is going to be used to map the sea floor, and help us to figure out some of the depths and formations, things that are not easily accessible. We can't just swim down there and say, oh look, there's an underwater volcano there, a submarine volcano. We use sonar to get a lot of that information that we can't just plainly and easily see with our own eyes. Scuba is used for the study of the marine environment for longer periods and at greater depths than what humans would just be able to swim on their own. Jacques Cousteau is known for helping to perfect this technology. I think we've got a quote from him on our syllabus as well, if you happen to notice that. Jacques Cousteau is a TV personality, had a show years and years ago. I think it was still running a little bit when I was a kid. It might even been reruns by the time I was a kid and ever saw an episode. So it was quite some time ago in like the 70s and maybe into the 80s a little bit, maybe a little bit before that as well. But Jacques Cousteau, the very famous TV personality, also comes with a little bit of controversy because early on in his career, some of his practices were not practices that we would allow or condone today. But he did come a very long way throughout his life. Later in life, he apologized for and recognized some of the damage that he had done to things like coral reefs or to the organisms themselves, and recognized the kind of that sacred value of the ocean and saw it through those eyes instead of just something for entertainment purposes. So that aside, one of his major contributions, other than just being a TV personality that put marine science into the view of the public, was he made some major contributions to helping perfect scuba. He wanted to be in the water, and so he helped kind of create that scuba equipment that would allow us to do some of the things that we can do today. Then we've got ROVs, remotely operated vehicles. They allow for the direct exploration of the marine environment when scuba is not an option. We can only go so far with scuba, and so ROVs help us to get even farther. We have research vessels, floating laboratories that allow oceanographers and marine biologists to explore the marine environment. They can do this for weeks at a time or months at a time, sometimes with the right ship even years at a time, without ever having to return to a land-based facility. So these research vessels obviously have incredible value for what they offer, and then all kinds of types of electronic devices and other gear that we use to study marine science. Our last slide here shows us maybe what some of these are. If you can see it, we've got a satellite dish up there and the onshore base. You've got an aircraft and the satellite who are able to analyze the surface. We've got an undersea node here that's measuring a number of different things, some of the chemistry side of it, the salinity and oxygen and some of that, but it also can measure things like current and wave flow, all kinds of stuff. You're probably all familiar with the idea of tags. We got buoys that are measuring stuff as well, and there's all kinds of stuff going on here where we are able to kind of capture some footage. And again, not just the biology side of it. This is not just for the purpose of seeing what kind of organisms are down there. All kinds of other aspects that come into play too, that are all incredibly important and all ultimately come together to make this class, Marine Science. There's Unit 1, Lesson 2. Look forward to seeing you in a few days for Lesson 3. Peace.